Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show with your host, Phil Tarrant.
G'day everyone, how you going? Thanks for joining us on the podcast today. Nearing the back end of February and already the year is flying by. Huge headlines coming out this year. One in particular, this Royal Commission is handed down with all these recommendations and we've been talking about it. I hope you're not as sick of it as what I am so far, but I think it's something which is pretty important to everyone to actually understand and appreciate what's going on and what you can do about it. As I've often said on this podcast with property investment, don't get too swept up about the things you can't control. Concentrate on those things that you can control. What happens as a result of these recommendations of the Royal Commission, you're probably not going to be able to do too much about. You can lobby your local minister if you do feel inclined about some of the changes, potentially broker remuneration. But what you can control is how you react to it, making sure that you are poised, you are ready, your finances are in order, your mortgages are set to capitalise on anything that does happen. Now, that's within the context of a changing political landscape. There's an election coming up. Federal election is also a state election coming up as well if you're in New South Wales, and some other changes across some of the other states as well. Federal election, so keep abreast, understand what's happening. There's lots of commentary around it. Go to smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. You pretty much find anything you need if you need to make some decisions or get some more facts and information. But that said, property is an interesting game. There's markets within markets. Obviously, Sydney and Melbourne markets have softened and come back a little bit. I've been reading over the weekend in the papers, and I spend sort of every Sunday afternoon with a couple of beers on my deck and all the papers, and I go through them. It sort of sets me up with information for the week ahead. And you have a number of economic forecasters and demographers, and I think about AMP Shane Oliver, for example, saying that peak the trough for property in Sydney and also Melbourne, looking at sort of 20+%. So where we are in that cycle, who knows? But it is a time of change, and we're focusing on the positives here within Defence Connect. We've had a lot of people on recently who've been talking about how they're looking to capitalise on and what is a changing market. Property, like life, it moves in cycles, moves in roundabouts, and it's a very cyclical market right now. And for the right property investor, there is some great potential bargains on the radar. Today, I'm going to have a chat with someone who is sort of in this space and looking to support their clients and themselves, working within property investment, buyer's agents. We like to get buyer's agents on the Smart Property Investment Show. We're very pro buyer's agent. We use a buyer's agent for everything we buy ourselves on our Smart Property Investment portfolio. Huge advocate. And, you know, if you listen to this thing long enough, you've heard me bang on how much I like buyer's agents. But haven't spoken to this person before, Melinda Jennison. She's from a company called Streamline Property Buyers. And we're going to get a bit into her story and the way she sees the world. Melinda, how are you going? You well?
Very well, thank you.
So you're down from Brisbane today?
That's right.
To come and have a chat with us. So thank you very much for making the effort.
You're very welcome.
Brizzy property at the moment. Do you buy right across Australia? You sort of service all markets, or are you sort of primarily Brizzy based?
We specialise in Brisbane. Basically, That's our backyard. I'm a Brisbane girl, born and bred, so I know the suburbs inside and out, and I've seen Brisbane change significantly over the years. So we're on the ground every day watching for, changes as they're happening, and obviously researching that market intensely rather than spreading our wings nationwide.
I'm quite privileged position with this podcast, and I can pick up the phone and speak to anyone in property in Australia, which is pretty cool. And I use it for my own advantage. I do admit if I am looking at a particular area, which is cool. And you need to know the specialists in particular markets to get a different read. And my view, if it's like wandering a souk of the Middle East or buying property, I normally ask 3 or 4 people the direction to somewhere to work out where I'm going to go. So with the Brisbane market, my conversations over the last sort of 6 months has been everyone seems to be waiting for Brisbane to do something. And I've got plenty of property up there myself, and I'm sitting there waiting for Brisbane to do something myself. Some people are saying the Brisbane market just will not behave like Sydney or Melbourne did in a sort of 2013, 14, 15s when it just went nuts. And other people saying, apartment market in Brisbane, don't go near it, this, that and the other. What's going on up there? Is it a good time to be buying in Brisbane is the question?
That's a good question, and I guess the answer to that depends on what you're wanting to buy. Now, for example, in the apartment market, we are still seeing some of the oversupply being absorbed, but we do have a steady increase in population growth, which is driven by both overseas migration and interstate migration. So whilst we were expecting a price slump in that area, we certainly haven't seen the slump that was predicted, and certainly a lot of that supply is is now being absorbed, which is good news moving forward. But we certainly see some softening continuing in the unit market, perhaps for the next 6 to 12 months, and then we'll see that steady out and increase into the future. And that's supported by some of the large research groups such as IBIS, who have predicted sort of slumps for 2019, but improvements in the years that follow. In the single house and land market, we certainly don't see the same. It's been fairly flat across Brisbane if you're looking at median values, but so there's certainly been pockets within Brisbane that are outperforming. And the latest CoreLogic data in January actually showed Brisbane had 4 of the top 10 sub-regions for capital cities in terms of capital growth, and we're buying in 2 of those regions for our investor clients, and that's a market that's sub $500,000, so it's showing good promise.
Where are they?
They're in the Moreton Bay region, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. Northern Moreton Bay region and southern Moreton Bay region.
Okay.
Moreton Bay is one of the highest growing shires across Australia at the moment, and there's a lot of infrastructure spending going into that area.
Is that the closest she's going to give me? It's my job to extract this information.
There's definitely certain suburbs within the shire that we avoid.
Okay.
And there's other suburbs. There's a new university being built at Petrie, for example. It's a priority development area that's been declared by the state government up in Queensland. There's a lot of infrastructure going in. A lot of the land has recently been rezoned for higher density development. So there's a lot of value that people are not yet seeing in purchasing good investments that still appeal to the owner-occupier. But, there's obviously different exit strategies if you're buying a site that has potential for future development.
We'll get into that because I want to touch on that. It's pretty important. But I'm happy that you specialise in the Brisbane market because I often cop some flack on the show, and I'm all for constructive criticism. I quite enjoy it. That it's a bit too Melbourne and Sydney centric. My argument typically is that, well, that's where most people are buying houses. So it's going to get the majority of the airplay, and also it's the markets which are in the greatest sort of change in their cycles right now. So it's been getting a lot of headlines. But I'm happy that you sort of focus in the Brisbane market. So I want to specialise in Brisbane today, which is good. And I'm sure a lot of people are going, yeah, that's great, because I know there is a lot of activity in Brisbane. Southeast Queensland is a very popular location now for investors. And if you look at the Brisbane market, it's gained a lot of awareness, I would say, over the sort of last 5-6 years. And a lot of it because of interstate migration, which is driving a lot of population growth. And also, I think a lot of people globally now choosing Brisbane as a place to base themselves. It's very different dynamics, but we'll drill down into that. It's funny you spoke about the Moreton Bay Shire. I've got a couple of properties up there in my own personal portfolio, and within the Smart Property Investment portfolio, there's quite a lot as well. And I want to touch on it later on around rates and stuff in Moreton Bay because it's bloody expensive, right, for some reason. I don't know why. But we secured a block of units in Lawton, which is one stop down from Petrie, sort of middle of last year, which we were pretty happy as an investment. And this was through our buyer's agent. And the logic of it was we bought one block, which was strated, but we bought the whole kit and caboodle, so we control the whole thing on the basis that it's a great location because of this university Sunshine Coast campus, is going in. So let's chat about that for a second. So this university, a lot of people are talking about it. What is it? I know it's an old brick pit or something, or it's the whole region was some factory.
It was called the Petrie Paper Mill, actually.
There you go. That's what I'm thinking.
And the area, a lot of the area is actually flood impacted land. So I guess it wasn't ever earmarked for development, but the way they've developed the university around the non-flood impacted parts of the site, there's a lot of ecological land that has been saved because there's koala habitats and things like that associated with the sites. But, with clever design, they've been able to, design the university between Kalanga and Petrie. I think there's going to be an exit from Dolly's Rocks Road in Kalanga, from what I understand as well. So it flows through that whole area. So
why does that represent good investing sort of location at the moment?
Look, I think within property investment, it comes down to supply and demand. But on top of that, it also comes down to having locations where people can secure good jobs, high-paying jobs. Universities, obviously, academics are, considered high-paying jobs. They're the types of jobs that people want to aspire to, I guess. But it also changes the demographic of the area significantly. So we feel that the area will gentrify quite quickly with young university students students moving in. We'll see the types of accommodation gradually change over time to suit those types of properties that students would like to live in. So there's lots of opportunities within the area and the region as a whole because of those sorts of issues.
And would you say us sort of buying an apartment block in Lawton is a good buy? Is that smart buying?
It's smart buying. Students like apartments.
They do.
Yeah. And train line. One train
right.
stop from the university. That's always good as well.
Yeah, it's right by there. They look like student apartments. Some good milk crate furniture, which every student has. But so what's your investment philosophy? You touched on it very quickly. You just don't buy cookie cutter stuff. You always look for stuff that has some sort of potential for enhancement in time.
Yeah, look, if our buyers are, come to us with their own brief, we'll follow their brief, but we'll certainly recommend the types of properties that give them various exit strategies. So, for us, we believe in, understanding what the purpose of the property acquisition is at the outset. So we discuss exit strategies before we even start looking for a property for a client. And, something that does appeal to a lot of our buyers is that if they are purchasing a site that has multiple exit strategies, it gives them more options, and we don't know where our life takes us. So to be able to potentially sell a property to a developer or to a family or to another investor at the end of the, holding period, it just gives another outlet or another exit strategy for the client.
So you're saying at the point of purchase, you should be buying on the basis of what the exit will be?
We always discuss strategy with our clients, that's right, because, in terms of property investment, it's important to know upfront what the purpose of the investment is and therefore to understand the timeframes that the investor has in mind. So that's all part of their goal setting and, developing a strategy. And we like to, make that really clear or help them understand what is best for them upfront. And we draw that out through a number of questions that we go through.
How long have you been a buyer's agent now up in Brizzy?
So we've been operating Streamline only for 9 months now.
Okay.
Yeah. So prior to that, I was working with another buyer's agency in Brisbane.
Okay.
And prior to that, it was property development, construction.
Other stuff. We'll have a chat about what do you think though of all these interstate buyers agents coming up into the Brizzy market and getting in the way?
There's a lot of it happening, and we certainly see Saturday inspections where bumping into others that may not be from Brisbane, and we certainly know a lot of sales agents that tell us about the interstate fly-in, fly-out buyers agents. Look, I think there's room for everybody in the market, and a bit of healthy competition never hurts anybody. But ultimately, I think local knowledge plays out. We can certainly be on the ground seeing what's happening on a day-to-day basis, and not just seeing what's happening in real time now, but understanding the fundamentals of what's happening, through different generations, and seeing where certain areas were 10 years ago and knowing what infrastructure is coming in, understanding what that area will look like 10 years from now. And I think with property investment, certainly it is a long-term horizon for most people, unless they're into flipping and development. That's a different issue. So therefore, understanding long-term trends in property, that's what's most important, and that's what we can help our clients to understand, because we're all over the local infrastructure and what's actually happening in real time.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I sort of vocally advocate the use of a buyer's agent is that it just gives you so many advantages against someone that's not using buyer's agent. So when you're at an open home or an auction, could you just look around and know who a buyer's agent and who isn't a buyer's agent? Is there a particular look these days? What's a telltale signs, that you're bidding against a buyer's agent?
Well, a telltale sign is that they're walking around filming or taking lots of photos and commentary, at the same time if it is a video episode. So, look, generally a lot of interstate buyer's agents will be videoing and filming so that they can take that information back to their clients. But look, we do that as well, simply because the reason a lot of people do engage buyer's agents is they simply don't have time to do it themselves. And, if we can inspect 10 properties and, narrow it down for them, and potentially if they do want to inspect, they may only have 1 or 2 to inspect rather than 10, it just saves them time. So in answer to your question, how do you spot them? It is a little bit obvious. They're the only ones checking meter boxes and, pulling furniture away from walls to have a look at what's actually really happening. A lot of people don't think to look for the things that buyer's agents or good buyer's agents generally do look for.
Well, what's the Brizzy market like? I've bought a fair bit of stuff up there, but I've never seen any of the properties I own in Brisbane. I probably should do, but I have received videos and all that sort of stuff. So I've done it as a detached Sydney buyer buying in Brisbane, and I am very confident with the properties I've purchased up there because of the process that's been undertaken. It's the reason why I use a buyer's agent. But what's the cycle of the Brisbane market right now? If you're buying up there, is there a lot of auctions going on, or is the auctions really scaled back right now?
It depends on the market. Certainly, in the lower end of the market, sub 500, not many people really go to auction. I think that a lot of people that are buying in that market are not necessarily getting pre-approvals to bid at auction. We're certainly still seeing auctions in the high end of the market, at premium homes, homes that are a little bit unique. Usually when there's a lot of buyer interest, it's always taken to auction. I think that's the sales agents believe they'll get, the best price by going through the auction process, and it gives them a lot of publicity along the way. So, it's a split market in terms of the types of properties that are going to auction.
So the sort of stuff that you're securing for your clients, are just lowballing offers to get an indication of just how desperate a buyer is to sell, or how are you marking your offers versus where the market is right now?
It depends on the property again. So, we secured a property for a client just on Saturday, and it was listed just on Thursday, and at the open house there would have been 15 to 20 groups through. So it was bumper to bumper. I saw a few other buyers agents there at the same time, and I knew that another buyer's agent had been through on the Friday as well. So in that situation, it comes down to supply and demand. It went into a multi-offer situation Saturday afternoon. Clearly the property was in a good location. It had, a lot of the elements that we look for in terms of a good property investment as well. And there were 4 offers submitted by midday today on that property. So in that instance, you really have to communicate with your client and be clear about the fact that when there are more buyers looking for the same property, sometimes you do have to spend more to secure the property, but we will never pay over market price. It's all about looking at comparison sales in the area, because at the end of the day, if one property, is not the property that we secure, there's always another one that comes up.
To your point around the Moreton Bay and this process of rezoning, maybe you can tell our listeners a bit about that and how it works and why that is important.
Yeah, so we saw about 3 years ago now, the Moreton Bay Regional Council rezoned a lot of land throughout the major transport corridors. What that means is that previously where there existed single homes on, single blocks of land, Council rezoned that land for a higher and better use. Now, what that means is with a rezoning, it allows that land to be used for something more than just a single dwelling. So at the moment, it might just be a house, but in the future, it may be able to carry the capacity for townhomes or units or, something commercial, depending on the zoning. Councils do that to help to plan for future growth. And when there's growth corridors or areas where there's population rapidly increasing and a lot of infrastructure going in, they plan for future population growth by rezoning land to allow developers to move in and build sufficient housing to accommodate the new demand that's coming into the market.
How do you balance the benefits of buying a property for today, and that's probably yield and some upside capital growth, versus the long-term exit you might be able to have with it, as in it's been rezoned and you might be able to put 12 units on this? How do you sort of draw the line one under the other?
That's very dependent on the investor and their personal goals, their financial requirements, how much equity they're putting in versus how much they're borrowing, what interest rate they are able to secure a loan for. Obviously, if they're within super, they're looking at much higher interest rates, so we have to balance that in a different way. So it really comes down to what the investor's goals are in terms of the importance of yield versus capital growth, and also different exit strategies, because someone that's looking for a 10-year turnaround versus someone that's looking for a 40 or a 50-year turnaround, it's very different in terms of the strategy that we would follow.
Running off in that question, and I imagine the answer to this is going to be it depends, but I reckon we get something out of this. You mentioned that you quite like that Moreton Bay sort of council area, which is a pretty big council area, by the way. It extends all the way up north and down south and close to the Brizzy CBD. But what would be the 3 or 4 fundamentals? If you're buying in that area, what would be the 3 to 4 fundamentals that you'd like to see in any property that you do secure?
Being a property investor myself, capital growth is fundamental to me. My personal belief is that you won't become wealthy through a positive cash flow strategy. Of course, that's dependent on the area, but we're usually in areas where we have higher capital growth, it does come at the compromise of yield initially. However, through the projections that we do, we can usually see that the yields or the cash flow does become positive at a certain period, into the future. So, we help our clients to understand at what point a negatively geared property will become positively geared, so that they can understand, the importance of a capital growth strategy. So we also do projections over a 30 or a 40-year period for all of our clients for any properties that they're looking at. So, we can compare a high income yielding property versus a property that may have more capital growth potential, so that they can see the position that they're in at 5, 10 and 15 years from now and just understand how different strategies impact their personal circumstances.
Okay. So capital growth potential is critical.
Yes.
And capital growth could be based on just buying well or under market value, but it could also mean buying an asset now which might be attractive for someone in 10 or 20 years' time. This is when you're talking about development potential. So this is the exit. So you might not develop it yourself, but a developer may buy it. How do you sort of work out whether it's got development potential?
Well, I'm a developer myself, so I know what makes a good development site. That's the first answer to that question. But we certainly, as a buyer's agent, we look at everything that ordinary buyers potentially don't look at. So all of the council overlays that do impact on development. We look at what's underground, stormwater, sewer, water access. We look at the frontage of the sites to understand what the capacity of the site is. We actually work with some town planners so that we can actually understand the potential yield on a site, even though there's no option for our client to be doing that right now. And we provide our clients with all of that sort of information. So they've got a bit of an understanding based on current zoning. It's not speculation. It's not what might happen. It's based on current zoning, what that site may be able to achieve.
So you mentioned that Streamline Property Buyers are a relatively new enterprise for you, but you've been in this game around development and property investing for quite some time. How did you end up doing what you do today? What's the backstory to it all?
Funnily enough, I come from an academic background, so sports science was the area that I was involved in, and I married a builder. So we had our own construction company for many years, and about 10 to 12 years ago, we decided that we didn't want to be the builder. We actually wanted to be the developer because we saw that the developer was making, the better returns. So we moved into the residential development space and we were developing our own properties at that time. So I guess we saw an opening. Buyers agents are a fairly new industry, especially in Brisbane. Not a lot of people really know how buyers agents can help them. And so we felt that we could, with the combined skill set that we had, we could really help people to understand property, what drives property, how they can actually, build their wealth through property, right from entry level, first home buyers, and taking them all the way through to, people that are earning very high incomes and want to be able to invest but don't have the time or the intel to know how to invest. And in those instances, we can help them to acquire a site that has development potential and also manage a development on their behalf.
And what sort of developments have you done yourself prior to doing this, like small townhouse developments, or can you give us a bit of an inside view?
Mainly units, so small boutique unit complexes within 8 kilometres of the Brisbane CBD.
Okay, and boutique being what, 4, 5, 6?
7 is our largest, and we've just offloaded a site that had a DA with for 10 boutique units as well. So, that's another exit strategy to actually acquire the site, obtain the development approvals, and then on-sell to someone who will build them. So that's something that we decided to do with our most recent.
And the DA process up in Brizzy versus Sydney. Sydney can be a nightmare, and so can Melbourne. Are the Brisbane councils a little bit more accommodating with development approvals, or are they just as hard as down south?
Depends on the council, and it depends on what you're trying to push through. Brisbane City Council have become a lot more strict over the last 8 or 9 months. They put out what's called Brisbane's Future Blueprint back in July 2018, and what that's done is it's really caused some de-densification in areas that have character homes. So in Brisbane, we protect the character of our Queenslanders, and anything that's got a Queenslander on it, you really can't touch in most instances. So, and just last week we saw council vote on another strange a change to their plan in that we can no longer build townhouses on low density land that's greater in size than 3,000 square metres, which really doesn't make sense when we've got an increasing population. So, there's a few things that the council are doing that people are, shrugging their shoulders and wondering why. But generally speaking, if you're compliant with the code in terms of what council do want, and you've got a good town planner on your team, then, you can generally know before you're submitting your application whether it's going to be supported or not.
And if you're buying a property with potential development upside, what level of feasibility can you do prior to buying it to ensure that when you do buy it, that you can actually get through what you need to get through?
That depends on the site. So when it's an investor just looking for a long-term strategy, we really don't touch on feasibility for development because it may not be feasible to be constructing that type of product in the current market. However, in some of our inner city locations where we're looking at infill development opportunities, we can do full feasibility for our clients, including, all costs associated with obtaining development approvals, building approvals, construction documentation, right through to completion.
So you mentioned that you're an academic before you started doing this. You invest like an academic, you invest like not an academic? Because I know a lot of academics, and a lot of them can never actually make a decision because they just overanalyze.
Analysis paralysis.
Analysis paralysis.
Lucky. So I work as a team with my husband. Yes, I am a researcher, so I do tend to really analyse from all angles. What that does is it lowers risk for us because it really puts everything on the table. He comes from more of a more pragmatic, I guess. He will just look at it for what it is. So together we actually make some decent decisions because, I'll analyse everything and together we'll make the decision. So it's not just my head overanalyzing all the time.
It's sort of our pedigree, actually, I guess, being an academic working in this space, but it needs to be balanced with someone who...
It does need to be balanced.
So it's a good team, and this goes down to choosing your buyer's agent. You need to make sure that they've got these respective skill sets to make sure that you can get the decisions you need making. That's really good, Melinda. I've enjoyed the chat. Thanks for giving us a little bit of an insight into Brizzy. You haven't given too much away, but, I think the whole Moreton Bay area, there's parts of it which I wouldn't go near. There's some parts of it which look pretty good. And that train line that now runs up through it into
Kippering and Redcliffe, correct.
Kippering part of Moreton Bay?
Yes, it is.
It's also same council?
Yep. It's on the peninsula.
I know a lot of people were doing a lot of stuff up that way. And so the university's broken ground. When's the first students move in? It's a little way away still, isn't it?
2020.
2020.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, so it's only a year and a bit away.
So, they're expecting about 10,000 students across the first 10 years. So it'll change very quickly.
Where do they think most of them live? Down in sort of inner suburbs of Brizzy and travel up, or do they reckon they're all going to hang around locally? And
it's a good question. Yeah. I think initially there'll be some share houses. There's a lot of obviously houses within walking distance of the university campus, but as time goes on and developers are building the products that students want to live in, then I'm sure we'll see a shift in where they're living and how they're living as well.
And you mentioned that because you're Brizzy based and you always have been. You're probably a little bit close to this process of gentrification. Like I've watched it here in Sydney, gentrification, and being a Sydney local, you can sort of pick up stuff probably quicker than what someone from out of town might not. You're just little nuances. So what's that? What's the telltale signs of gentrification in a Brisbane sort of suburb or regional? Like here normally you start seeing dog grooming businesses starting to open up, right? And you start going, hang on a second, people are starting to have a bit of money around here, right?
Yeah.
Or hipster bars.
Yeah.
What do you see up in Brizzy?
Yeah, little suburban bars are starting to pop up in some of the suburbs that are gentrifying. But I think initially we start to see in our housing, we start to see some Queenslanders become renovated homes. We start to see some of the old post-war homes getting knocked down and new or brand new homes being built in their place. So I think that we start to see it in the housing, and then it filters through into some of those lifestyle elements like small bars, little cafes. The cafe culture in Brisbane is really, starting to become a big thing that people look for when buying property. So, things like that pop up in those suburbs, and all of a sudden the oldies are selling out and the new young hipsters are coming in.
There you go. Well, Melinda, thanks for sharing your views, your visions to this part of the world, and make sure you keep connected. There's a lot of people interested in Brisbane, and while Sydney and Melbourne might be a bit on the nose at the moment for investors, I think there's a lot of people who are keeping their powder dry and waiting. There's still a lot of interest in that Brizzy market. So we'll keep covering it here at smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. But any info you can give us, I'm sure will be really appreciated.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Nice one. Thank you. Remember to check out smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. If you're not yet subscribing to our morning newsletter, so you're the first to know what's happening in property and property investment right across Australia, not just Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, smartpropertyinvestment.com.au/subscribe, or it's also all over social media. So just search Smart Property HQ and you'll track us down. Any questions at all about today's podcast or Brizzy in general, email the team. We'll try and get them answered. Editor at smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. And if you like what we're doing with these podcasts, please press that subscribe button wherever you're listening to it to make sure that you get every new episode as it comes down the line. We'll be back again next time. Until then, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.